Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Bbeltdan, and today I'm going to be making a latex mask. The mask is going to be of a character that I created that is inspired by the Cenobites that we see in the Hellraiser movies. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, to get started, I am going to be using a casting of my head I did several years ago. It is moldy, it is far from perfect, and it is actually starting to crack, as you can see right there. But for the sake of this project, it will work out great. Now I'm going to be using plasticine modeling clay to go ahead and model all the details in, because it is an oil-based clay that doesn't dry out. So once you put it on, you can actually leave it out for days, weeks, and months without having to rehydrate it and worry about the clay cracking or shrinking, which is something I've had problems with in the past. So what I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm laying out a fine little foundation of this clay all over the head sculpt, because there's a lot of issues with this head casting that I did, and this will allow me to go ahead and correct some of those mistakes for when I do the final making the mold that I'm going to be using to do the slush cast of this latex mask. So once I go ahead and get done laying that all out, as you can see here, it gives me a good foundation that I can go back and smooth in, and I can also add more clay on a little bit later, which is what I'm going to do here to start sculpting the details. First I go ahead and I draw a little bit of a line into the clay to kind of show where my mouth is at and where the teeth are going to be at, and now I start to kind of bulk up that area, because I can't necessarily pull back my own flesh and cave in my own skull to kind of mold inward to show the teeth. So I'm going to have to actually bulk out the mask to actually give it the illusion that I have teeth that is being exposed by pulled back flesh, as you'll see in the mask a little bit later. Now, it's going to make the mask a lot bigger and thicker than I originally intended to want, but as long as I make everything in proper proportions to everything else, you really won't even kind of notice, and it'll actually look very good. This is something that has been done in the special effects industry. Think about any zombie movies where you see where the zombies' teeth are shown. So as you can see here, the teeth are actually jutted out from where my mouth is actually at, so are the cheeks, but as long as it's in proportion for each other, it looks okay. The effect goes out. The teeth don't look exactly right, but you know, considering my modeling skills and everything, I think it'll work out great. I think it looks good. So from here, once I go ahead and start putting on the silicone molding material, I want to make sure that it releases properly and smoothly. So right now I'm covering it with a release agent, which for this case is just petroleum jelly. If I use petroleum jelly, I'm pretty much ensure that I can't use this clay again, but that's okay. I can always buy more. Now I'm going in with the brush and I'm painting it in to try to make sure that I get this jelly, the petroleum jelly, in every single nook and cranny, because I want that mold to come off very easily without risk tearing it. So here I am using some material that I bought online from Smooth On. This is the trial size, and this is a material that it takes about 30 minutes for it to dry. So you have about 30-minute working time before it really starts to dry, and a full 24 hours before it fully cures, where you can start removing it. It's a part A, part B mix, and you use 50-50. And the trial size, I was worried that it might not be big enough or enough material there to actually do the full head cast, but it was more than enough. I didn't use all of it. I think I maybe used about 3/4 of each part A of part B, and I still had quite a bit less. So you can definitely get the trial size if you want to kind of experiment and do your own casting of your own head, and it's a lot cheaper than buying the full bulk. So once you get it all mixed up, now it is the fun part of applying it onto your model, or in this case of my sculpt of the mask. So I'm slapping it on, and now the problem that you can see here is that this material drips, it runs. Maybe if I use the 15-minute setting time, it would start to thicken up a lot quicker and I wouldn't have this problem. But in the end, it worked out just great. I just keep scooping it up off of the plastic bag that I used to catch all of it, and just put it on the model. Now another thing that I could have done is silicone will stick to silicone to itself very well, so I could have put on a thin coat first and then gone back and put on subsequent coats to make it thicker, because there were indeed a couple of areas of where it started getting a bit too thin, and I find that out once I start to try to cut the mold away from the sculpt. And here it's actually starting to kind of thicken up a little bit, so I'm trying to once again scoop up as much as I can and try to apply it back onto the sculpt in where it starts to thin out. Now here I am making the shell, and this is going to be a two-part shell so I can separate it easily, and I am using plaster of Paris bandages that you can get at any kind of hobby store. So I'm applying the front, and I apply on several layers of this because I want it to be thick, and the purpose of this is to prevent the actual silicone mold from collapsing in on itself when I start to do the slush cast. And I put a seam around it, you saw me do first, and that is going to be the definitive split line between the back and the front portion of the shell, so I could split them in two, as you will see a little bit later. Now I start to do the back, and from here I underestimated about how many of those bandages I had, so I had to kind of make do. So if you don't have bandages but you do have plaster of Paris, you can use paper towels in its place. So mix up some plaster of Paris, throw the bandages, or not the bandages, but the paper towels inside the plaster of Paris, and just put it on. And it does work out. Maybe not as good as the bandages, but in a pinch it does indeed work. I just had to work a lot faster here because the plaster of Paris was starting to solidify a lot quicker than I was anticipating. I should have put some cold water instead of using lukewarm water, and that would have slowed down that time. So I'm going through and I'm making a mad dash trying to put as much of that plaster of Paris on to thicken up that shell as much as possible. From here, the shell is dried, so now is time for me to go ahead and split it. So I'm removing the back portion first, right along the crease line, and once I remove the back and the front, those two pieces should be able to go together almost seamlessly and hold and be able to do its job of acting and preventing that silicone mold from collapsing in on itself, or it should have if I did my job correctly with applying that silicone molding material onto my sculpts. So once I remove it, just to make sure, yes, they all go back together. A couple of areas that was a little bit too thin on that cast or on the shell, but I go back and I fix it later. Now it is time to cut it away, and as you saw right there, first I was, for whatever reason, deciding to try to use the blunt edge of the knife, but then I soon realized, well, it's nothing but just clay and plaster of Paris underneath there, so I don't have to worry about cutting anybody. But if you're going to cut somebody, if there's a live person that you're cutting out of that, you may want to use a blunt knife so you don't necessarily get blood and everything in your brand new mold. Because unless you want it to be super realistic, and have cut lines, in your mold when you start to do your slush cast, then maybe you could go ahead and use a sharp knife. I'm kidding. Don't use a sharp knife on real people. But here, I don't care because I'm not going to use that sculpt again, so just cut it all away. And after a few minutes of slowly cutting and pulling all that away, I now have my mold. The back portion of it was extremely thin. The front portion had enough thickness there to where it was able to hold itself up inside the shell, but I have to come up with some pretty unique ways to try to get that mold to hold while I'm doing the slush casting, which I'm doing here. I went ahead and mixed up some acrylic in some latex to where I colored the latex, but also it allows me to where I can go back in and put on some layers of acrylic paint on it for details later, and it sticks a lot easier. So you just pour it in, slush it around, try to make sure that you get a good even coat all along the inside, and then you just pour it back out. And I do this rinse and repeat process at least 12 times. 6 times I do it with a tinted latex mixture that I batched up, and the other 6 I use just straight latex. So you just pour it back in so I can use it another day. Now here I'm putting in the straight latex with no acrylic paint put into it, and I probably could have got away with just 6, but I was running out of time on this and I didn't want to have to do this entire process all over again, so I went ahead and played it safe and put in all 12 layers. So I just slush it around, pour it back out, rinse and repeat until I get a full 12 layers. Now is the time for me to go ahead and try removing that latex slush cast out of the mold. Now latex will stick to itself with a passion, and once they start to stick together, try to remove it, you can actually tear into your latex and get a lot of little bad spots that won't look right. So to prevent that, I'm using baby powder, and I'm very liberally coating the entire inside of this mask. And as I start to peel away, I am putting in more baby powder. So I peel a little bit of the latex away, put a little baby powder on, tear the shell away. I'm not going to be using that again. Tear a little more, pour a little bit of baby powder in, tear a little bit more, make sure that I get it all over my hand. By the time I think I was done, this little table looked like it was a scene from Scarface. You know which scene I'm talking about. All that white powder everywhere. But after a little bit of time, and I end up tearing into my latex or my silicone mold a little bit too much, but after a while I was actually able to get the mask completely out. A couple little areas that actually started sticking together, so just apply a little baby powder and slowly start to peel that away. And voila, success. Now, so I could be able to see and breathe, I start to trim the mask. I'm trimming out away holes for the eyes so I can see out of, and holes in the nose so I can actually breathe. And I trimmed a little bit of the way of from the neck, and I might have trimmed out a little bit too much. It comes back to bite me a little bit later, but once again, live and learn. This is all a part of a process of me learning. So after cutting all of the holes out, now it's time for me to go ahead and start painting in the details. I use a little bit of acrylic with a little bit of liquid latex, because at this point in time the acrylic will actually stick to the mask because I put already some acrylic and latex on it, but the acrylic will dry and it won't have any flexibility, so it'll start to crack off. So as long as you mix it up with some latex, then the paint will not only stick better, but it will also have a bit of a flexibility so it won't be flaking off later on. So I'm using a bit of white to go ahead and paint off the teeth. You can see that I put in a little bit of the base coat for the muscle and gums and underlying tissue that's underneath the skin. So you just go through and just paint this, and I definitely need to kind of work a little bit more on my painting skills, as well as I need to probably invest in an airbrush, because the overall paint job would have looked a lot better if I would have had practice on painting and with using an airbrush on this. Now it is time for me to go ahead and put in some of the little gory details. So I'm doing a lot of this just kind of by feel. I'm not using a lot of references. I would definitely recommend all of y'all to try to use references unless you're very good at sculpting stuff like this, because I didn't use any references to do the sculpt of how the eyes peel back and the mouth peel back should look. And painting this, I didn't use any references. I just went by feel, and the mask would have probably looked a little bit better if I'd done that. So I definitely recommend references, references, references. So after a bit of a paint job, the mask is now finished. Just to kind of top it all off, I went ahead and created some hooks using some paper clips and got some wire and super glued that all in to kind of show the hooks that is pulling back the skin. And the test fit Looks like it fits perfectly good. The neck is something to be desired. It doesn't quite fit perfectly on it, but I can cover that up with a part of the costume. It actually came out very well. I kind of classified underneath that little category to where it's not as good as I imagined it to be, but it turned out a lot better than what I was expecting, so which means I have room for improvement. So, but I mean, a couple of things that I would do a little bit differently for the next mask is, for one, I would definitely going to need a better head cast. So the molding is a lot closer to my face, because I think that with the way that I did my head cast, it's kind of puffed out just a little bit. It was a little bit too much extra space, so the mask doesn't quite fit exactly where, close to my face as it probably needs to. Another thing that I would have liked to have done is to try to extend the neck even further down, maybe down into this little chest area right here. So when I'm wearing a costume, this seam right here is completely hidden. But once again, I enjoy doing this. I had a blast, and I've learned quite a bit from it. I was able to actually do a very decent job, learn from my mistakes, and so now I feel a lot more comfortable if I was to go ahead and do this again, and I'm definitely plan on making more masks in the future. So once again, this is Bbeltdan. This is my latex mask based on the Cenobites from the Hellraiser series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.